Masechet Baba Batra Daf Ayin Chet. We begin a new Mishnah. Hamocheret hachamor lo machar kelav. Nachum Hamadi omer machar kelav. If I sell you a donkey, according to Tanakama, that does not include its vessels. The Gemara will explain. It's talking about the saddle bag, like in this picture. I only sold you the donkey, not the saddle bag. However, Nachum Hamadi disagrees. He says that it comes along with the saddle bag. They are included. The Gemara will explain why. Rabbi Yehuda omer pa'amim mechurin פעמים אינן מכורין. כיצד? היה חמור לפניו וחלב עליו אמר לו מכור לי חמורך זה, הרי כלב מכורין. חמורך הוא אין כלב מכורין. Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree with Tanakama in some cases, and I agree with Nachum Hamadi in some cases. Sometimes the vessels are not included, and sometimes they are included. What does it depend on? It depends on the formulation that the buyer says. Let's say the seller has a donkey and it's saddled. Now the saddle we'll talk about, but it also has the saddle bags that are attached to it. And the buyer says, sell me this chamor. He points to it, this very chamor, and it has all the bags on it. In that case, they are included. So he would agree with Nachum Hamadi in that case. However, if the buyer asks, is this your chamor? Or you could say a statement also, chamor chahu, this must be your chamor, right? Is that right? And if it is, I want to buy it. That's more like saying, sell me a chamor. Is this one yours? If not, which one's yours? Is that one yours? Any chamor, I just want to buy a chamor. That means he's specifically focusing on the animal itself and not on everything attached to it. So the Gemara will explain further. This difference between this chamor means as is. I want it just like it is in the picture. Whereas, is this your chamor? I'll buy it if it is. If it's not, well, maybe another one. That's like saying a chamor, and then the vessels are not included. Amar Ula, machloket besak v'di sakaya v'chumne. The Tanakama sabar setam chamor lirkob ka'e, v'nachum Hamadi sabar setam chamor lemasoi ka'e. Aval, ukafu mirdat v'kilkeli v'chebek dibre hakol mechurin. Ula explains and qualifies the Mishnah. He says the machloket between Tanakama and Nachum Hamadi is only regarding a sack, a saddlebag, and a kumni. The Gemara will explain what that is. And so a di sakaya, that's from the Greek, di sack, right? Di meaning two, and sack like in English, and this refers to a double sack on both sides, which is good for balance, as opposed to just a single sack that you'd have to put on top. All these kinds of holders, sacks, bags, are that's the machloket. Tanakama says that a chamor, generally a donkey is used mainly for riding. So if I say I want to buy a donkey, we assume it means for riding. So that's why the saddle is included, but it's not for carrying things. However, now Nachum Hamadi disagrees, and he says a standard donkey is used for carrying burdens. And so what's the point of a donkey without any saddlebags? It has saddlebags. They're probably even made to fit the donkey, not a big one, a small one, the right size. And so, since its ordinary one is made to carry burdens, therefore, Nachum Hamadi says that the bags are included. However, the saddle and the saddle cloth and the harness and the saddle band that holds the saddle onto it, all these things are included according to everyone, even Tanakama would say. So, because these are certainly, good size and fitted good, and since everyone would agree that it's good for riding, that you're selling a donkey is used for riding, even Nachum Hamadi, who says it's also used generally for carrying burdens, would agree that's also for riding, and therefore everybody agrees that the saddle is included. Me'etibe, we have a challenge against Ola. Hamor v'chelav ani mocher lecha. Hare ze machar et ha'ukaf, et ha'mirdat, v'et ha'kilkili, v'et ha'chebek, אבל לא מחר שק ודי שקיה וחומני, ובזמן שאמר לו היא וכל מה שעליה, הרי כולן מכורין. תמד אמר לחמור וחלב, הוא דקנה עוקף ומרדעת, הלא אמר להכי לה. Batra teaches that if the seller says, I'm selling you the donkey and its vessels. He just says vessels. This is as opposed to the donkey and everything that's on it. So there's a simpler language. It's in between. There's really three levels of language. You could say just donkey. You could say donkey and its vessels. You could say donkey and everything on it. So according to this baraita, if you say the donkey and its vessels, then that does include the saddle, saddlecloth, harness, and saddle band, the things for riding on it, but does not include the sack, the saddlebag, and the kumni, which we will explain. So even though you said kelav, kelav includes the saddle, but not the bags. However, if the seller says, I'm selling you the donkey and everything on it, and assuming that the saddlebags are currently on it, then those are included as well. So let's analyze this baraita. Why does he get the saddle? Because he said, I want the donkey and its vessels. The vessels includes the saddle. That's why he gets it. But if he didn't say and its vessels, then the saddle would not be included. So therefore, if we go back to the Mishnah's case, he doesn't say vessels. He just says, sell me the chamor. That's all the language he used. So it should be, according to this baraita, that the saddle is not included. But Ula said that the saddle is included no matter what, according to everyone, even according to the Rabbanan. So how is Ula going to reconcile himself with this baraita? הוא הדין דאף אגב דלה עמד לחמור וחלב, נמה וכף ומרדת מכורין. והכמשמע לן, דאף אגב דאמר לחמור וחלב, שק ודי שקיה וחומנה לקנה. No, in fact, the same law is true, even if he did not say the donkey and the vessels, even if he just said donkey. Nevertheless, the saddlebag, those are also sold no matter what. Okay, if so, then why does the baraita talk about a case where he said the saddle and the vessels? If the same is true, he gets the saddle even if the donkey and its vessels. If the same is true, even if he leaves out the word kelav, so then you should teach me a bigger chidush. Even if you just say donkey, that the saddle is included. So why does the baraita say mention a case of when he says donkey and kelav? Oh, it's teaching you a chidush on the other side, that even though you said vessels, nevertheless the bags are not included. If you want the bags, you have to say kol ma she'aleha, everything that's on it. And so Ula solved the problem, and we answered the question. Now we go back. Mai vechumni, what is this chumni that we've been mentioning a few times? Amar Papa bar Shemuel markabta de nashe. It's a saddle used by women. Women, until just about 100, 200 years ago, never sat on a horse or on a donkey in the regular way, but rather side saddle for the reasons of modesty, so that both the legs were together over on one side. That requires a special saddle. So that is not called riding an animal. Therefore, that's the same as a bag. It's kind of like, the husband is bringing his merchandise, and his wife also is a burden on the animal that he's taking along. So that's more like a bag and less like a saddle. And for that reason, Tanakama would say that this saddle for a woman is like a bag and not like a saddle, even though an animal generally is for riding. It means that's for riding in a regular way, the way that a man rides, and not in the way that, not side saddle in the way that women ride. That would be more like carrying a burden. Now we have a question. Ibayalehu be'odan alav machloket aval be'shenan alav modeh lehu nachum hamadi, or dilma be'shenan alav machloket aval be'odan alav modu lerabbanan lenachum. What case is the Mishnah assuming? Is it assuming a case where the vessels, the saddlebags, are currently on the donkey at the time of sale? And he says, here, I'm selling you this donkey. That's where the machloket is, where Rabbanan says, even though they're attached to it right now, they're not included in the sale, because standard it's used for riding, and so you have to take them off, and then you get the donkey. And Nachum Hamadi says that they are included in that case. But if it were a case where the bags were not on it, then Nachum Hamadi would agree. Nachum Hamadi would say, they're only included in the sale if they're currently attached to the donkey. If they're not attached to the donkey, I say, here, I'm selling you this donkey, I don't have to go and find the bags and put them on to sell it. And Nachum Hamadi would agree with Rabbanan that they're not included in the sale. That's one way of reading the Mishnah. It seems to be the simple reading of the Mishnah. Or maybe the case of the Mishnah is when the bags are not currently on the donkey. That's where there's an argument where the Tanakama says the bags are not on it, so they're not included. And Nachum Madi says, even though they're not on it, still, we assume that they're on it because that's what you're going to use the donkey for. That's where the machloket is. But if the bags are on the donkey at the time of the sale, then everybody would agree. Even Rabbanan would agree with Nachum Hamadi and say, oh, the bags are on it, and I'm selling it as is, and he would agree that the bags are included. Okay, this is a very important question to clarify the meaning and application of the Mishnah. We're going to see 3 attempted proofs. The first 2 will be for option number 1, that is a case where the bags are on the donkey, and the third one will be for the opposite, that the bags are not on the donkey at the time of the sale. So here's the first proof, which is from the Baraita that we mentioned above. Atashema. Ubizman shama lohu vechol ma she'alav hare kulan mechurin. If at the time of the sale, the seller says, I'm selling you the donkey and everything on it. That was the sefa of that baraita that we used to question Ula. If he says everything on it, then it is everything is sold. So clearly this baraita is talking about a case where the bag is on it, because everything on it, he says everything that's on it, and the bags are on it, so then the bags are included. So if we follow the first option, that the Mishnah is talking about a case also where the bags are on it, then we have an author for this baraita. The author of the baraita would be Rabbanan, because Rabbanan would agree with this distinction of the baraita. If you said, I'm selling you donkey, you don't say anything at all, or even if you say, I'm selling you the donkey and its vessels, vekelav, Rabbanan say that the bags are not included. That's the resha. But if you say it and everything on it, then they are included. So that's very clear. This baraita is according to Rabbanan. Ela amart b'she'en odan alav machloket, ava odan alav dibra kol mechurin hamaneh. However, if we follow the second possibility that we suggested above, that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the bags are not on the donkey at the time of sale, that's where there is a machloket. But if they were on the bags were on the donkey, then everybody would agree that they are included in the sale. Then who would be the author of this baraita? This baraita wouldn't make any sense, because the baraita says that only if you say it and everything on it, hu v'chol asher alav, then the saddle, then the bags are included. But if you don't say that, then the bags are not included. But that's not true, because the baraita clearly is talking about a case where the bags are attached to the donkey, because it says hu v'chol ma she'alav. So that means they're attached to the donkey. And if you don't say this phrase, then they're not included. But according to this, the second version, everyone agrees that when they're on, even Rabbanan agrees that when the bag is attached, that then it's included, even though you don't say this language. So then this baraita could certainly not be according to Nachum Hamadi, and cannot even be according to Rabbanan, has no author. So that's a good proof that we have option number 1. And we answer, Leolam b'shen odan alav machaloket, v'Rabbanan hi, ve'ema ubizman shamar lo hu, v'chol ma shera'ui liot alav. No, we can follow the second option, that the Mishnah is in the case where the bags are not on the donkey. And the author of the baraita is Rabbanan, and the baraita is in fact talking about a case where the bags are also not on the donkey. And we have to change the language a little. The sefa of the baraita is when he says, I'm selling you the donkey and everything that is fit to be on the donkey. I'm selling you the bags that fit well on the donkey. They're not here right now. They're on the floor over there. But he specifically includes them. Then the baraita makes sense. The resha is according to the Rabbanan, that since they're off of it, so they are not included. If they were on, they would be included, but since they're off, they're not included. But if you say that the donkey and everything that would be on it, then it is included. And so there's no proof from that baraita for either option. Okay, proof number 2. Tashema. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Pa'amim mechurin, Pa'amim she'enan mechurin. My love, Amai de Ka'amar Tana Kama Ka'e Rabbi Yehuda. The second proof comes from the end of the Mishnah itself. After we had the opinion of Tana Kama and Nachum Hamadi, Rabbi Yehuda gives a compromised position. And he says sometimes it's sold and sometimes it's not sold. Now the case where it's sold is when he says, this donkey, I want it, here as is. That means it's clearly clear that Rabbi Yehuda is assuming that the donkey has the bags attached to it. And that's why he says, if you say this one, then it's sold. If you say, is this your donkey? It's not sold. Now, is Rabbi Yehuda not referring back to Tanakama? He's saying, sometimes I agree with Tanakama, sometimes I don't agree with Tanakama, right? And so he's qualifying what Tanakama says. Sometimes he's right, and sometimes no, he's not right. So if he's referring to Tanakama, then that means they're talking about the same case. And Rabbi Yehuda is clearly talking about a case where the bags are attached, and that means Tanakama must also be talking about a case where the bags are attached. That means the machloket is when the case where the bags are attached. That's option number one. Isn't this a good proof? And we say, not necessarily. La, Rabbi Yehuda mileta chariti ka'amar. It could be Rabbi Yehuda was talking about a different case. He wasn't making reference to Tanakama. He said a statement independently. I think if you sell a donkey, it depends on the situation, on the formula. Sometimes it is sold, sometimes it's not sold. He wasn't saying sometimes I agree with Tanakama, sometimes with Nachum Hamadi, and therefore it could be that the Tanakama and Nachum Hamadi were talking about when the bag is not on the donkey, and Rabbi Yehuda was talking about a case where the bag was on the donkey. What would Tanakama say? If the bag was on the donkey, that's a separate question. He wasn't talking about that. Amar le Ravina le Rav Asher. So now we're going to try a third proof. Tashema, macharet hakaron lo macharet haperadot. Vetane Rab Tachlifa bar Ma'adaba kameh de Rabbi Abhu. Macharet hakaron macharet haperadot. Ve'amar le ha'anan ve'ha'anan lo machartenan. Ve'amar le ismeye. Ve'amar le la tetargem matnitach be'adukim bo. Ravina tells Rav Asher, I can bring a proof that our Mishnah follows the second option, and the machloket is when the bags are not attached. And I'm going to try to prove that from a discussion that we had on the previous daf. On the previous daf, which was talking about a previous Mishnah, it said, if I sell you a wagon, the mules that pull the wagon are not included. And then Rav Tachlifa from the west came and he cited a baraita in front of Rabbi Abhu. And the baraita said the opposite. If I sell a wagon, then the mules are included. And then he told me, wait a second, our Mishnah says the opposite, that the mules are not included. So then Rabbi Rav Tachlifa said, should I erase this baraita? And Rabbi Abhu said, no, don't erase it. Why not we could just assume that the baraita that you quoted that says that the mules are included, that's when the mules are attached to the wagon. Mules being attached to the wagon is the same as bags being on top of the donkey. And whereas the Mishnah is talking about a case where the mules are not attached to the wagon, and that's why the Mishnah says they are not included. Now that we've established that the Mishnah, before this Mishnah that we're analyzing now, was talking about a case where they're not attached, so Michlat Matnitin b'she'en adukim bo, u'mideresha b'she'en odan alav, sefaname b'she'en odan alav. So we can figure out from that discussion, and his Rabbi Abu's answer, the way to reconcile the Mishnah with that baraita is that the Mishnah is when the wagon is not attached to the mules. And since that Mishnah beforehand is talking about a case that's equivalent to the bags not being on the donkey, that means this Mishnah, which is called the Sefa, compared to that, is also when the bags are not on the donkey. And that's a proof for option number 2. Isn't that a good proof? And we answer no. Adraba, ema resha, aval lo machar lo tavadim v'lo ta'antiki, v'amrinan may antiki, v'amara papa iska di begava, umederesha be'odan alav sefa name, be'odan alav ela tana mile katane. You're assuming that all the Mishnayot are in a row, and they're all talking about the same type of case, that they're all either something that's attached or that the vessels are not attached. But I'm going to show you that it's not consistent, because if you go all the way back to the beginning of our Perek, it says that if someone who sells a ship does not include the slaves or the antiki. And this is, what is antiki? Rapapa explains, we're talking about the merchandise that's on the ship. So that means it's on the ship, it's attached. So that's clearly talking about a case when the vessels are on the ship. And since the Hesha is talking about a case where the vessels are on it, so too the Sefa, our Mishnah, must be talking about a case where the vessels are on it. So you see that the Mishnah cannot be read consistently, because the first Mishnah is clear when it's on it. The Mishnah before this one is where it's not attached, the wagon is not attached, it's not on it. So you see that the Tana is teaching each statement individually, and you cannot bring a proof from one Mishnah to the next, and so we leave it without resolving that question. Next, Amar Abaye, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Natan, Vesomchos, Venachum Hamadi, Kulahu Sibira Lehu ki mezaben inish mideh, Ihu vechol tashmishte mezaben. Since we mentioned just now Nachum Hamadi, and he says that the bags are included, Abaye notices a pattern, and he sees throughout all various Mishnayot that the following Tanaim all follow the same opinion, that when you sell an item, at least some of the vessels are sold along with it. Now, this does not mean necessarily that they would all agree with each other. Some, talking about all different cases, and so there's different applications. But nevertheless, there's a common denominator that these minority individual Tanaim include more than other opinions. And so he's going to list. There's 6 of them, and if you want to remember them in order, you could use this mnemonic, Zagam Nasan. So Zayin is talking about Rabbi Eliezer, who has a Zayin in his name. Rabbi Eliezer Ditnan. Rabbi Eliezer Omer HaMocheret Bet Habad Macharet HaKorah. Rabbi Eliezer, we learned in the Mishnah back on 67b that if I sell an olive press, that includes the beam. Even though the beam, that main big beam that pushes down on the olives, is technically a movable item, but it's called a Bet Habad, the item, the house of the beam. So therefore that beam is really the main part of the press, so it wouldn't make sense to sell a press without the beam, so to be Eliezer includes it. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Ditnan. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer HaMocher Ta'ir Machar et HaSantar. This is also in the previous Mishnah. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, if I sell you a city, it comes with the guard. The city guard is included in it. Rabbi Meir de Tanya. Rabbi Meir Omer Machar Takerem Machar Tashmishe Hakerem. Rabbi Meir says, if I sell you a vineyard, this is in a Braita, it includes all the other things that are used for the vineyard, the sticks and other items that, even though they're movable, but they're only used for, and they're only used for the vineyard, those are all included. Rabbi Meir seems to be the most expansive in including all of these things. Rabbi Natan v'Sumchos bisit v'dugit. Rabbi Natan and Sumchus said, if I sell you a ship that comes along with the little rowboats, those little fishing boats that are called either bisit or dugit, that they're synonyms, Nachum Hamadi, Hadamaran, and Nachum Hamadi is what we just saw in our Mishnah. So you see that Baye is noticing that all of these different Tanaim all follow a similar opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Pa'amim mechurin, Mai shenacha morecha zo, Mai shenacha morecha hu. Now let's explain Rabbi Yehuda. And sometimes the bags are included, sometimes not. If you say chamorecha zo, then they are included. If you say chamorecha hu, it's not included. What's the difference? They sound the same. Amarava chamorecha zo yada de chamaradi dehu. V'haida kata deka amar le zo mishum kelav kamar le. When I say I want to buy this donkey, then that means I already know coming in that this is your donkey. And so why am I saying, why don't I just say, I want to buy a chamor? I'm saying chamor echazo because I want it as is, with the bags attached as they are now. So because he's saying an extra word, so it's clear he's referring to that. Whereas chamorechahu delayada de hamaradi dehu v'achi kamar le chamorechahu But when I say, is this your donkey? That means I'm not sure if this is your donkey. And so therefore I'm coming and saying, listen, if this is your donkey, then can you sell it to me? But I'm saying chamorechahu not as a pointer to say, this, I want this one. I'm asking, this donkey, is it yours? So then I want to sell it. So then I'm pointing to the donkey just to identify who is the owner, not to say I want it precisely as is. That explains the Yehuda's distinction. Next Mishnah. Hamocheret hachamor macharet hasiach, macharet hapara lo machar et bena. If I sell you a donkey, then it comes with its offspring. Whereas if I sell you a cow, it does not come with the offspring. That's interesting. Why not? The Gemara will discuss. Machar ashpa, machar zibla, machar bor, machar memeha, machar kaveret, machar devorim, machar shobach, machar yonim. If I sell a dunghill, a spot where everybody puts the dung, then that comes with the dung that's in it. And if I sell you a cistern, it comes with the water. If I sell you a beehive, it comes with the bees. If I sell you a dovecote, it comes with the doves also. So this is common denominator. I'm selling you a thing. It comes with the contents of that thing as well. Hechi dame, ida amar le hi ubena, afilu para ubena name, ida la amar le hi ubena, afilu hamor nami la. Now we ask, what's the distinction between the donkey and the cow? What kind of case is it talking about? If I specified I'm going to sell you it and its offspring, well then in the case of the cow, the offspring should also come with it. And if I didn't say it and its offspring, I just said I'm selling you it, then even for a donkey you should include only the mother and not the offspring. So how can we explain this Mishnah? Amada Papa Damale, Hamor Menika Upara Menika Ani Mocher Lecha. The Papa says, we're talking about a case where I say, I'm going to sell you a nursing donkey. Or the other case, I'm going to sell you a nursing cow. But even though it's the same phrase, they're going to be interpreted differently. Bishlama para ikalememar dechalba ba'ela elachamor maika amar le shemamina hiu benaka amar le. When it comes to a cow, so then it makes sense that I'm selling you the cow. Why am I saying a nursing cow? Why is that important to say? Well, who cares if it's a black cow or a white cow or nursing cow? Why am I saying a nursing cow? Because you're buying it for the milk, and that's why it's important to know. I'm selling you a nursing cow. Oh, okay, you're going to pay extra for that. Means you don't want the offspring, you want a nursing cow because you want the milk that it's producing. But for a donkey, what you want? You want the milk of the donkey. A donkey is not a kosher animal, so the milk is not useful. So therefore, if I say I'm selling you a nursing donkey, I'm adding the word nursing because that means I'm including the offspring with it. And so these are different cases, and the application of the case is dependent on the circumstance. If you say a nursing cow, then that just means the cow. Oh, and extra credit. It has milk too. Nursing donkey, who wants a nursing donkey? Nobody wants the milk. Must be that you meant that you're giving the offspring. Okay, good. That explains the Mishnah. So that means that right in the case of the donkey means it and its offspring as well. Now we ask a language question. V'amai kari le siach. How come in the case of the cow, you just say it didn't get its bena, its child, offspring. But in case of chamor, you could have said bena. Instead you use the word siach. So why is the offspring called a siach? Because a young donkey, it follows pleasant talk. When it's older, already it doesn't want to move, and you have to go and force it to move. But when a young donkey, you just say, hey, come here, and it goes to anybody, any stranger, and it's very passive and easy to control. Amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachman, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ma dichtib al ken yomeru hamoshelim vegomer. Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan is now going to give a long derasha that's based on what we just said, that a donkey is easily led. And so yes, what do the following pesukim mean? These are pesukim in Bemidbar when it talks about how Bnei Israel went and they conquered Sichon, the king of the Emori, and it quotes a little poem that is said, Ayamru HaMoshelim. The bards would say this poem. Now in context, it's making reference to the fact that Sichon themselves conquered Moab. And that's important because Bnei Israel were not allowed to conquer Moab. Hashem says, that's Moab's land, I gave it to them, you should not conquer it. However, Sichon, Melech HaMori, there's land that he conquered from Moab, Moab, and then Bnei Israel were allowed to conquer that land because it didn't belong to the Moabites anymore anyway, and so they were able to conquer it along with the other lands of the Emori. So that's a simple reading of this poem that says, come to Heshbon, firmly built and well-founded is Sichon city, because fire went out from Heshbon, a flame from the city, Sichon city, and they destroyed the city of Moab and the lords of Bamot by Arnon. So it's describing how Sichon went from their cities, their places, and they came and destroyed the places of Moab. Or Lecha Moab, right? Woe to Moab, and so on. So now Rabbi Yochanan is going to give an allegorical interpretation of this pasuk. HaMoshelim, Elu HaMoshelim B'Yisram. The Moshelim, that's not talking about physical rulers that conquer other places, but rather those who conquer their own inclination. Ezu Gibor, HaKobesh Et Yitzro. So they're able to conquer their evil inclination and do the right thing. Bo Cheshbon, Bo Nchasheb Cheshbono Shel Olam. Hefsed Misva Keneged Sechara, Uschad Avera Keneged Hefseda. They say, if you ask them, how'd you do that? How'd you overcome your evil inclination? They said, it's easy. We make a calculation, the calculation of the world. Let's compare the loss from a mitzvah with the reward, and on the other side, put the reward for an avera with its loss. The reward for an avera, that pleasure, momentary pleasure one gets for doing a sin, but look at the terrible consequences that it will have for a long time. Whereas to do a mitzvah has some loss. You might have to use some money to give charity or to buy something, but so there is a little loss, but consider the great reward that comes from it. Once you make that calculation, it'll be obvious to anyone that the Yetzer Hara is leading you down a bad path, and you should do the right thing instead. Tibane v'tikonen. Im ata oseh ken, tibane ba'olam hazeh v'tikonen la'olam haba. This is a double language. Let it be built and established. If you do this, and you quash your Yetzer Hara, and you make the proper calculation and do the right thing, then that person will be built in this world and established also in the world to come. If a we're reading that instead of Ir, meaning city, we're reading it as Ayir, meaning a young donkey. If a person makes himself like a young donkey, that follows any pleasant talk. It's very easily manipulated, right? Again, as we saw above, any stranger, anybody tells a donkey, come over here, it goes. It has no thoughts of its own, has no self-control. So if someone, a human being, that follows its Yetzer Hara, whatever it says, hey, why don't you go take a bribe? Why not go steal? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, and is so easily led astray, what's going to happen eventually to that person? That's the next part of the pasuk. A fire went out from Cheshbon. Fire will come out from those who make the calculation and destroy those who don't make the calculation. In other words, you'll see easily the comparison between the tzaddikim who make the calculation and those who don't. And comparatively, it doesn't necessarily mean that in heaven they mark things on a curve, because not just comparative, they also are making the wrong decision. But part of it is that they're going to see, as we saw in a recent daf, in an Agadah, that the shame of those who have a small tent compared to those who have a big tent, those who only have a covering on top and not a full tent all around. That shame is part of the punishment. And in addition, the calculation that one can make and that they ignore is going to cause them punishment. The continuation of Pasuk says a flame will come from Sichon. Sichon is a reference to Tzaddikim. Even though up here, it was because it was connected with Ayir, it was a reference to Sichon as Sicha. So we made a play on words. But here, we're making a different play on words, Sichon as Sichin, meaning trees. Tzaddikim are compared to trees, like Tzaddik Katamar Yifrach, or the very beginning of Sefer Tehillim. And so here it says that a fire will come from the place where the tzaddikim are, because they're called the trees. Achela ar Moav, ze melech achar Yisro ke'ayir ze shemelech achar sicha na'a. And that fire that comes from the tzaddikim will move over and go to those who follow their own desires, just like a young donkey follows some nice words, pleasant talk from the Yetzer Hara. And so again, here similar idea as before, and here it might mean maybe even that the punishment that a tzaddik might deserve for some small bad things that he did will be transferred over and added on to the punishment of the wicked person. Ba'ale bamot arnon elu gaseh haruach damar mor kol adam sheyesh bo gasut haruach nofel begeinam. Ba'ale bamot, those who of high places. Who are these people of high places? It means those who are high in themselves, the arrogant people. As the master says, anyone who is arrogant will go to Gehinam. Vaniram, Amar Rasha and Ram. The next part of the pasuk, Vaniram, is talking about what Rasha says to himself. Oh, there is nobody on high, there is no God, nobody cares, therefore I can do evil without consequence. Avad cheshbona shel olam. The evil person says, there is no accounting in the world. That's how he justifies doing what he does. Ad dibon, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hamten ad sheyavo din. And what does Hashem say? Ad, wait until din comes. Just wait until judgment comes, and then you'll see that in fact there is Ram and there is an accounting. Vannashim ad nofach ad shetavo esh she'ena sericha nipuach. And we have laid waste even as far as nofach. That is referring to a fire that does not require fanning. Ad nofach doesn't require nipuach. That's the fire of Gehinam. It doesn't need any fanning. It's just hot by itself. Ad medeba ad shetadib nishmatan ve'amrila ad de'abid mai de'ba'eh. What does it mean that the wicked will be there? Ad medeba. It means until their souls are pained, de'aba, pain, or some say it means until Hashem does that which he wants to do with them when he punishes them according to what they deserve, following Aramaic. Ad medeba means mai deba'eh. Medeba mai deba'eh. Hashem will punish them according to His will. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Now this is a different derasha, but it's a similar theme. כל הפורש בדברי התורה אש אוכלתו, שנאמר, ונתתי את פניי בהם, מהאש יסעו, והאש תאכלם. Anyone who separates himself from Torah will be consumed by fire. As Pasuk says in Yechezkel, Hashem says, I will put my face against them, I will set my face against them. That's in anger and punishment. They left fire. Torah is compared to fire in Yirmiyah, and they separated themselves from Torah, and therefore fire will come after them, meaning the fire of Gehinam. Ki ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Yonatan, kol haporesh asmo b'dvrei Torah nofel beGehinam. And when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he reported in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, anyone who separates himself from Torah also will fall in Gehinam. Shene'emar Adam to'eh miderech haskel bikal refaim yanuach. Pasuk in Mishleh, a man who strays out of the way of understanding shall rest in the congregation of spirits, Refaim. What does that mean? Ve'en Refaim ela Gehinam shneimar ve'lo yada ki Refaim sham be'amkeh she'ol keru'eha. What Refaim means is a reference to Gehinam, as it says in a different pasuk in Mishleh, but he does not know that the spirits are there, that those whom she has called are in the depths of the netherworld. Refaim was referring to these shadowy, ghost-like figures in Gehinam. And so here also another derasha with the same theme, that someone who leaves Torah will end up with extremely negative consequences. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.